Okay, hi. Nice to see you. This is the last session. Welcome. Last session before the exam, of course, but the last content session. We have a lot to do today, and let's be very brief on this part, the information about the exam. Just some points. I mean, the major source of information is that I will collect everything on the website, and I will also send out an email to you. But here are the most important points. Please be on time at 2 p.m. next week for the exam. It's better if you gather in front of the room because we will then let you in, maybe shortly after 2. I think it will be 4 different rooms. These 4 different rooms, like this room, but also the 3 big rooms in the E01 building. And I will send out an email indicating which is your room. Yeah, I will go by ranges of the first letter of your last name, but I didn't figure it out yet. So please check back on the website. I mean, if you end up in the wrong room, that's not a problem if it's only a very, very few people. It's important. We will try to seat you so that every second row is left empty, and also that only every second place is occupied. So it is important that you start filling the rows in the middle when you get seated, in the room. Do not sit on the side at first. And it is also important, and something that I'm required to check, that you bring a photo ID, be it your student ID if it has a photo, or any other legal document connecting your name and your photo. And place it on your tables, in front of you. We will go through the rows during the exam. The exam will take 90 minutes, like working on the questions. After we got set up, at some point the 90 minutes will start, and only then you are allowed to open the exam sheet, which you will find in front of you, but do not open before it starts. And then once it starts, you have 90 minutes. And if you are finished early, you have to stay in the room, because it usually creates a huge kind of noise and business in the room in the last 20 minutes when many people are finished already, and that's very unfair to the people who are still working on it. That's why I took this from the last year, that I will now implement this, that we all stay for the 90 minutes. If you are quick, then you're quick. Then you can kind of write poems in your mind or whatever. The thing is, you are not allowed to take out your mobile phone or your computer or any other electronic device after you are finished and staying in the room. So please do not bring and do not use any electronic devices, any notebooks, any written notes, anything apart from a pen. This is the only thing you need, a pen, a permanent pen, please. And this is this point. I'm very strict about the last point here, and this will really lead to an immediate exclusion from the exam if you start using any digital device. And this is, again, the point where I try to summarize all this on the website. So if you are not here now, because there will be 280 people registered for the exam, and now here there are maybe 70. So apparently, I hope this information even gets to the majority of the people registered for the exam. And last comment on the exam. I mean, as I told you already, I'm not a particular fan of this examination part of this lecture here, which was a great fun and a big thing also for me. But examination is really something I think one should not do in this big classes, but we are mandated to do it. So I hope you bear with me. And I'm really sorry that I will not be able to answer questions during the exam. There is no point in raising your hand, because there will be 5 different locations simultaneously, and there is no fair way in handling real-time questions that might be relevant to everybody, or that might then not give an information advantage to some who are in the right room. So I just don't feel able to take questions, as this is the only solution for the equation to be fair. And if there is something like some spelling error or some ambiguity in how I phrased some question, then all of you will have to deal with that ambiguity. I'm happy to actually take corrections and remarks on the exam sheets. That's a very nice thing some people did in the past, like correcting the spelling mistakes or pointing me to some ambiguities. This way it gets better every year. I try to kind of, I mean, if there is a huge ambiguity, I might even take out that question from the evaluation. Yeah, then I will just not weigh it in when I count the points later. Also, the exam will be corrected in a very mechanic fashion. Yeah, it is box ticking and it is box counting on my part. Yeah, so there is no like this person I know is better than they did here or something. No, absolutely not. It will just be counting wrong versus not wrong crosses. Yeah. Okay. Let's start with a little recap, as always, from the last session. Last session, I introduced, or I tried to give an overview of the EU digital legislation landscape, most famously starting with the GDPR, the Data Protection Regulation. And I think what you should remember is that this is really a general approach. Yeah, it is not domain specific. It applies to every forms of data processing as soon as personal data is involved. Yeah, this is the scope of the GDPR. Personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. Yeah, if the data you handle is, for instance, pseudonymous and it is possible not for you, but maybe with some extra information to identify the people in the data set, then this is still personal data because the people in the data are still identifiable. Yeah, maybe not to you as the data controller because you're missing, for instance, the keys that would translate the pseudonyms to the real names or the links to the real persons, but still it is identifiable. Only anonymous data, whatever that is. In the past versions of these lectures in the last years, I had a full session on anonymity, spelling out that this is actually a very difficult notion, mathematically hard to define, and usually anonymization techniques are in this kind of cycles of a cat and mouse game. Somebody claims this is anonymous, and then a couple of years later some computer scientists come along and say, haha, we broke anonymity, and this is actually a very interesting subject. I cut this out from this year's lecture for different reasons, but if you are interested, you are invited to look into the slides or the videos from the last year, which are available on my website. I think it is important that the EU has the EU GDPR rests on certain principles. Yeah, the data protection regime follows these principles that data processing is only, like, it's generally forbidden. Yeah. Unless there is some legal basis. Yeah, that is maybe the major principle. It must be lawful. So if in doubt, it's not allowed. It's only allowed if you can point to a legal basis. I switched the order of the slides. So the legal bases are these here. For instance, if the user, the data subject gives consent, that is a legal basis on which you are then allowed to process the data. But there are also other legal bases, yeah, apart from consent. Not all data processing of personal data has to rest on consent. Yeah, for instance, your health insurance, you do not need to give them consent. They are legally required to process your data. Otherwise, they couldn't even operate. So that is a different legal basis. Yeah.
In the lecture, you also talked about how consent is a pretty flimsy word here. We can use just the banner and just click on yes, and right, that's one of the big problems with consent, with explicit consent. Would there be a way to strengthen this definition of what consent has to be, that we must make it clear what the data is being used for, or that this consent barrier has to be higher without having to change the whole legislation? Or is it like, oh no, now we have to change everything to solve that problem?
Yeah, I would say this is actually a question that is the matter of ongoing legal and research debates. for sure, and as a matter of fact, consent is proven to be very inefficient because it is flimsy and it is easy to obtain, for instance, using nudging techniques. I think it is the subject of legal cases, how broad or specialized informedness has to be, like the kind of the text surrounding the consent button. How general, how broad can it be? Is there something like broad consent? Is this valid? I don't know the details. I mean, for instance, in medical research, there is such a thing as broad consent, but this is research. I don't know about the companies, but there was also some big rulings by the European Court in the last years that restricted the broadness of consent, for instance, for social media platforms or for advertisement. This is an ongoing debate, but for sure, consent is one of the weak spots because it is behaviorally so easy to... Yeah, it might be a strong concept, but it is in practice and behaviorally it's such a weak thing, actually. Then there is also this legitimate interest. Yeah, this is also a legal basis, which is maybe even more flimsy, although it is nothing that you agree to. If a company can argue that it is in their legal interest, in their legitimate interest, for instance, as an entity that does business, to process this data, then this can be maybe used as a legal basis. This is also a legal ground on which a lot of, for instance, advertisement, cookie, data processing has been done, but this has also recently been restricted by the European Court of Justice, but this is ongoing debate. Yeah, and I told you there are these principles. Yeah, the principle one, the lawfulness, this is the thing with the legal basis that you need to be able to point at a legal basis. But then there are other principles, and one of the major principles in data protection is purpose limitation. Yeah, you can only, when you process personal data based on some legal basis, for instance, consent, you still are restricted by the other principles. For instance, by the fact that you will have to name the purpose in advance and can then only process the data for that purpose and not repurpose the data for something else. This is so vital and so important, and you are even mandated to delete the data once the purpose is fulfilled. Yeah, you cannot infinitely store the data, at least not if the purpose for which the processing was done, the collection was done, is fulfilled at some point. Then you are mandated to delete the data. You also, this is called storage limitation. Yeah, you're also mandated to delete the data if you are requested by the data subject. Yeah, they have the right to, at each moment, request you to delete the data. You also have to take care that the data is accurate and that people can rectify it if it's not, and so on. Yeah, this is maybe important to remember. It's also important to remember that the GDPR is really only one piece of this huge puzzle of EU digital legislation. This is here an overview of EU legislative acts. I'm not assuming that you can read the pixelated font here. It's only to show you how many legal acts there are out there in the EU. And the dark blue ones are already in force, while the others are in the parliamentary process or in the process of implementation. And I picked out only the 6 and the 7 with the red boxes here to debate in a little bit more detail. I mentioned also the AI Act because it's maybe of core importance here in the context of AI. It is actually a great achievement by the EU to come up with a general regulation on AI systems last year. Here again, we see this general approach. It's not in certain domains, but it is like it applies, or it wants to apply to all forms of AI out there. Let's see how that goes in the next 10 to 20 years. It is, however, a product liability regime, as you would call it. It is a legal approach that is akin to how you would regulate product risks. For instance, there's regulation out there that power points in the wall must be isolated and whatnot, so that you don't get an electric shock. In a similar way, AI systems are being regulated. So this is actually a regime that comes with procedural obligations to the operators of systems. They have to do some auditings. They have to take transparency measures. They have to do a fundamental right assessment if it is a high-risk system. So it is always things that the operator is mandated to do, but it is not, for instance, a structure where some oversight office would first have to give their kind of go before you can go live or even build an AI system. Yeah, so it relies heavily on self-monitoring and self-implementation of the regulations and the provisions by the industry instead of real oversight. And it comes with this risk stratification of AI systems that I also pointed out last time. Here, this is the procedural regime point. The risks here there are these 5 risk categories, and only the unacceptable risk category are AI systems that are outright forbidden, and the other, even the high-risk systems, only come with procedural requirements that operators have to fulfill. I would like to bring to you, it will be a little bit intense because I try to be fast. On the one hand, there will be some more basic stuff that is also even relevant for the exam, but in the end I will speed up a little bit because I also want to give you some overview of more research things that we are doing in our research here specifically. So this is maybe also the slot where you can lean back and look a little bit on more kind of current questions in data protection in connection to AI. Let's start again with what we already were talking about in the very beginning of the lecture. Yeah, predictive analytics, or the capability to predict things, is maybe very central and very inherent to current AI technology. I mean, both classifier or scoring models are predictive systems, but also next word prediction, for instance, in language systems, also in large language models, also rests on that principle of prediction. But let's stick with the more basic examples. You all know that very well, and it has been shown so many times that from behavioral data, from data that is comparatively easy to obtain about many users, be it online behavioral data or offline behavioral data, such as data collected from wearables or from your GPS position, you can infer many, many things about people. And among these things, there are the classic demographic attributes, such as gender or sexual identity or age, educational level. These are classic demographic attributes that have been interesting, for instance, to the advertisement industry for 100 years. But you can also infer non-classical and much more fine-grained attributes about people that you would have dreamed about knowing about people 20 years ago. Yeah, so information that that is so specific to the people or so sensitive in terms of the area of life to which it applies that it is classically not available in general about people, but it's now. And among this is, for instance, disease prediction, or like from a couple of Facebook likes, you can predict such things as high blood pressure, or you can predict psychiatric diseases such as depression or anxiety disorders. You can predict substance abuse, for instance, not only alcohol, but also other substances, illegal substances. You can predict personality traits, as you probably also learned in the Cambridge Analytica scandal and this whole kind of idea of influencing politics with targeted advertisement that is psychologically targeted. And you can predict such things as political views about people. I mean, this is kind of the basic situation in which we have been living for at least 10 or maybe 15 years now. It's important to debate that in terms of data protection and regulation from a more in a more functionalist fashion. So this is kind of the phenomenon we are facing, but what does it do functionally? Functionally, this is predictive analytics. So what is predictive analytics? Predictive analytics is this idea of using some models, can be AI models, like in the sense of machine learning techniques, but it can even be very foundational, fundamental, like statistical models such as linear regression or something. as a certain engine that that you can feed with information that is readily available about somebody. Let's call that auxiliary information, and it outputs then some target information you want to know about that individual, but that is hard to get from the individual. Yeah, so it is kind of this machine that allows to convert readily available information to scarcely available information about people. And it is not important for the ethical debate here and the regulatory debate to open how this blue box actually work. No, we do not to open the black box here. We only know what it functionally does. And functionally, it escalates the sensibility of the data. Yeah, it is less sensitive data, and it becomes more. And the question is not so much how does it work, but more who is able to operate such a blue box or such a predictive model. And you are typically only able to operate such a predictive model if you are a big data aggregating company or entity. So, for instance, and this is actually the prototypical case, you are, for instance, a social media platform. If you are a social media platform, you typically have millions or even billions of users, and all of the users, by definition, create the green data points. Yeah, or the green squares down here are single users, and upon just using such a platform, you produce the behavioral data such as likes, or what you share, or what you view, and how long you stay on some content, and whom you connect to, at what time of the day you do all this, and the list goes on. Yeah, this is the data that you cannot not create or produce on such a platform. So by definition, it's available about everybody. But then if you nudge your users to also provide the sensitive information, for instance, in this example here, information on their sexual identity. It's information that you will not easily get about many people, but let's say you get it from 15% of your users, or only from 5. Maybe it's the 5 or 15% of users who think they have nothing to hide, and they readily tick the boxes in their profile on their sexual identity. Then you can, from this cohort of like subset of your user base, which is still a couple of 100 million users, you will have both data points, yeah, the auxiliary data and the target data. And from this, you can then take as training data to train a machine learning model with supervised learning that will learn correlations between the green and the red data fields. And once you have done this, what will you do? You will, of course, apply that model. It doesn't even matter how accurate it is. Yeah, you will typically not publish the accuracy of that model. Maybe it's 85%. You will then apply it to all the other users. Yeah, you will just extrapolate, use that model that was trained on the people who think they have nothing to hide, and use it on all the other users to complete the data that they did not want to give you. This is what you typically do, and this is how business models have been working for more than 10 years now in the data economy. Why do you want to have that data about all users? Yeah, because you can sell it. Maybe you do not sell the model itself here, because this is actually very valuable, but you sell access to the model, for instance, to the insurance industry, people who want to do risk scoring, the health insurance or car insurance industry, life insurance industry. You can also sell it to banks who want to risk score people, and you can, of course, use it for targeted advertisement. Yeah?
When we sell this information to the insurance industry, are you allowed to sell to the specific user, like who it is, so that if that person goes to the insurance agency, theoretically the system gets like, no, because we know that this model predicted that you have this and this disease, you specifically, you're going to give it a bigger rate?
This is what happens. I mean, the question, what exactly does the social media company sell? I would say they only sell a risk score. So they can like combine 30 predictions or 200 predictions about people in a risk score, so that they do not have to disclose, for instance, medical information about the person to the insurance company, but only they would only say, yeah, red flag or yellow flag or 80% flag or whatever. Yeah, so to obfuscate because yeah.
No, the insurance company will use my first name, last name, address, and email to connect me to the data, to my risk score that the social media platform gave.
I mean, in a typical work data flow, I would say that this is more insurance companies that somehow will get your social media handles, or yeah, for instance, you sign up through Google on an app, or use any other, or a telephone number would be a very unique identifier. Probably not your first and last name. That is not a unique identifier in our world. But more like real unique identifiers, such as an immediate connection to the social media platform through single sign-on functions, or phone numbers. And it can also happen on a more aggregate level. Yeah, an insurance company might also obtain a model that more causally would risk score people, for instance, based on zip code or street name or demographic data that they have. Yeah, so targeted advertisement is also one of the outlets of such predictions. Here, this is actually the back end of Meta platforms. I asked somebody to take some screenshots. If you want to run an ad on Insta or Facebook, you will have a back end where you can upload the ad and also configure who should see the ad. And you can choose among many demographic data points, not only this here, but also there is a huge list, for instance, family and relationship status with a fine-grained selection of choices, or here again relationship status continued, or here political and social issues. And this is only 3 screenshots of several hundred data points that you can choose from as an advertisement customer on such a big social media platform. And of course, this is not data that the average user will enter, but that some users enter about themselves or implicitly disclose, for instance, by signing up to a group of divorced people or whatever. And then it can be predicted about many others through the mechanism I just showed you. Yes?
Is it true that they track menstrual cycles as well and then down to targeting?
This is definitely possible, and there are a lot of menstruation tracking apps out there that are commercial and that also use the data for tracking or targeting purposes. And some of them have even been, for instance, in the New York Times, been reported to have like deals with Facebook, so that they exchange the data with Facebook, so that Facebook can target you based on where you are in your menstruation cycle with a certain specific advertisements that would then exploit specific real-time moods or whatever. I mean, there is the Drip app. Yeah, it's an open source app that stores your data only locally. I think one should not miss an opportunity to advertise for this alternative menstruation tracking technology, yeah, that is developed by a feminist open source community, and that does not do these things, because the data will never leave your device, and it's an open source thing that you just download on your device, and everything then happens on your device. But yes, this is a huge risk. Here, this is also an example I like. I'm not sure that you know, but Spotify is an AI company. It's not only a streaming service, but, and I'm now showing you screenshots from their own website. They are, if you have the Spotify free service, then you get advertisement, right? And that advertisement will also be played out to you based on targeting mechanisms. And what they do is real-time mood targeting. So they predict from what you are listening to right now, yeah, and in the kind of in the linear succession of the titles that you've been listening to over the last minutes, they predict in what kind of a mood or activity you are right now. And what they officially advertise is that they can find out, for instance, if you are just doing a workout or chilling with friends. In our data ethics outreach lab study project that we are running, have been running for a couple of years here at the IKW, Some of my students looked a little bit deeper into this by also kind of analyzing the data, using data access requests, and they found out that they can even predict other things, such as, do you feel happy right now, or rather lonely, or are you depressed, or do you feel insecure? This is also things that you can predict from the data that they have, like the music listening stream of an individual. And this can, of course, then be used to exploit vulnerable moments to play out, for instance, advertisement for cosmetic products or a yoga retreat or whatever it is. By really doing some real-time targeting. It's not only enough to find individuals who are, for instance, feeling more insecure with their body or whatever. No, it is here the idea is to even find the right moment in the day of that person to really catch the vulnerable moment for some advertisement. Yeah, this brings me to the next topic, which is a direct response to this, and I call it predictive privacy. This is actually one of my major research areas and has been, even when I was a postdoc, with this I actually applied here in Osnabrück. Like the idea is that this should be counted as a privacy violation, although it is unfortunately not in the classic understanding of privacy. Because the information about users that's being used here is information that these users never gave away. So it's not that you disclosed some information to some platform or to some operator, and then the operator misuses or shares your information in a way that was not kind of agreed with you. But the operator predicts information about you that you never disclosed and maybe don't even know yourself. Yeah, for instance, if they predict that you are 95% likely to be depressive, maybe you don't know, or maybe you don't even want to know. Or maybe they predict some chance of high blood pressure in you, maybe you don't want to know, and you don't know, but still they can treat you differently and use that information for automated like differential treatment of people. Yeah, differential pricing in insurance or differential treatment in application processes, in job interviews. You don't want to hire a person who is depressive or has a tendency or even a higher risk of developing depression at some point, and so on. Yeah, and my intuition was that this should be debated and theorized and politicized as a privacy issue, but privacy more in the sense of data protection. Yeah, and I made that difference clear 2 weeks ago, and less in the sense of individual privacy issue. Why is this a violation, or in what way is this violation of privacy through predictions something new, or something that doesn't fit the more classical notion of privacy? There are 3 key observations here that are counterintuitive up to the point of facing resistance in the data protection community itself. The one point is that there is an obvious escalation of sensitivity here. Users typically disclose information they find less sensitive, such as their behavioral data, browsing data, usage data on a platform, the data that they share on an app, that they explicitly share. Users usually kind of consider how sensitive is the data I'm entering here right now and make decisions, okay, this is not too sensitive, okay, I can enter it. But what happens here is from this data they can derive much more sensitive data, as you saw, data that most users would not voluntarily share. But they just don't know that this inferences happen, and this is why I call it an escalation of sensitivity, because it's not what users expect subjectively. The second thing, and this is now the point where people really get headaches, is that the privacy violation here rests on some collective causation structure. It is because some fraction of the platform users disclosed a certain sensitive data about themselves that the platform can train a predictive model that then can be applied on all the other users to infringe on their privacy by means of prediction. And this is why your privacy can be infringed on based on data of many other people and on kind of privacy decisions of many other people. And the other way around, the privacy decisions you take affect other people. And usually they affect people at the societal margins much more than in the societal mainstream. So if it is okay for you to use Dropbox to store your CV or to use a Gmail account because it's so handy, Gmail is such a huge data aggregator. They can make such brilliant prediction about anybody. Then it is a decision that applies or affects also what Google in that case can predict about people at the societal margins who do have anything to hide, who do have something to hide. Yeah. So this is really the collective issue that's entering here, and the privacy thing is then not only an individual business of every one of us. Yeah, it's everyone's own business to decide what data they share with what companies. Yeah, might be true in the pre-AI or pre-predictive analytics world, but in this technology exactly operates at that blind spot of individualistic and liberalistic framings of privacy. Yeah, if everybody only has their own advantages and disadvantages on their mind and everybody cares only about themselves, then this is exactly what you can do, because this is in the blind spot of this individualistic perspective. And the third point, which also gives people headaches, is that you can do all this with anonymous data. Yeah, you can train a predictive model with anonymous data. The data that you input in a supervised learning mechanism, the behavioral data on the one side and the target information on the other side, does not need to include your identity. Yeah, it can be what you like on Facebook or on Instagram, or which TikTok videos you rest on for how long, on the one hand, and some sensitive information such as whether you are suffering from depression on the other hand, and then you can train a predictive model that predicts from the one data the other data about any other individual out there, and you do not need identified personal data to train such a model. And this is why this data protection problem is not at all, how would you say, regulated or in the scope of the GDPR, because the GDPR does not hold for anonymous data. Yeah, this is what, for instance, then leads to this concept of predictive privacy, and individuals or groups' predictive privacy is violated if personal information about the person or group is predicted against their will or without their knowledge, on the basis of data of many other individuals. Yeah, this is kind of trying to bring this situation that we are facing here into a definition of a certain aspect of privacy. And I also added this qualifier that this is only a privacy issue provided that these predictions lead to decisions that affect anyone's well-being or freedom. Yeah, because it is an objection that sometimes comes, yeah, so if I throw dice and predict whether you are happy or sad, this is a violation of your predictive privacy? No, it's not, as long as I do not treat you differently. But if I make crystal ball predictions about whether you are a good or a bad student and then grade you accordingly, probably I'm violating your predictive privacy, at least in my assessment. Yeah? Once action follows from the prediction, it is a violation of your predictive privacy if I predicted that information about you. And predictive privacy violations are really a new type of privacy violation, and I try to make that clear here in this slide, where I try to compare this form of privacy violation to two more classical versions of it. I think, and this is also actually a historical journey that we can see on this slide. The whole issue of privacy and data protection started with the electronic data processing or computing becoming societally more widespread in the second half of the 20th century, and people first were thinking about the risk of surveillance. Yeah, for instance, your insurance processes some of your health data, and maybe some hackers or secret services can hack into the computer system and steal some data about you. So they would break a barrier. Yeah, they would be intruders in the data processing system, and that would be an attack vector on your privacy. This requires that you will be targeted, or at least the insurance company will be targeted, and that somebody really breaks through a wall or through an access barrier, or that a leak happens, and so on. A completely different form of privacy violation emerged in the 90s, in the 1990s, through the risk of re-identification. That was a completely different historical situation. This is now not the like incipient spread of electronic data processing, but it is more the point in the 90s where electronic data processing was pervasive, so that large parts of business processes and administrative processes were digitalized. And in this situation, for instance, insurance companies, and first of all in the US, came up with the idea that we could use these large troves of data for statistical purposes. Yeah, so now that we have digitalized all, for instance, insurance service procedures at our health insurance, why not do some statistics with the data? And we do not need like the personal links to the individual persons in the data. We only want to have an aggregate picture. So the question was, can we use all the individual data points in some anonymous fashion, like we anonymize the data points and then we can use them for statistical purposes. And that led to the point where insurance providers would publish anonymized versions of the treatment data of their patients for research purposes, and anonymization at that time was operating by just removing the names and zip codes and maybe making the birth dates slightly more coarse, like by the year only and not by the day. And that was then anonymization. And then very famously, Latanya Sweeney, a student at the MIT in the beginning of the 90s, reconstructed the governor of MIT's medical record from such a data set and sent it to his office. And that was a big scandal in the US, and that led to the whole research field of anonymization and anonymity, and to the mathematical insight that anonymity is never or hard to define in a way that is universal, and it always depends on outside information and can often be broken. And that led to a completely new form of privacy attacks, because here data was not stolen, yeah, but data sets, large data sets, were intentionally published, but with a guarantee of anonymity, and that guarantee of anonymity was kind of reverse engineered, or individual database entries were reverse engineered. This is qualitatively a hugely different attack vector in privacy. It took Germany more than 20 years in politics. The German politics, it took them more than 20 years to acknowledge this different attack vector. In the beginning of the 2000s, German politicians were still only thinking about the risks of hackers and theft and intrusion when talking about privacy, and not of the risk of re-identification. Yeah, and I would say that prediction is just a new attack vector that is qualitatively as uneven to the other two as the other two are. So this is the idea of predicting information about you, about information that you might not even know and never disclosed, and that might not even be accurate. And this is the thing. I violate your predictive privacy also if I do an inaccurate prediction about you but treat you differently. Yeah, the idea of the privacy violation is here connected to the fact that you are being treated differently, so that somebody will benefit and some other body will disbenefit from it. And if it is inaccurate, that makes it even worse. But it is, in both cases, a violation of your predictive privacy, or predictive violation of privacy. So, predictive privacy infringements constitute a novel challenge in data protection due to the collective enabling of this form of attack. And this is really did not yet arrive in politics. I can tell you, data protection regulation is not made to protect against these risks. Yeah, this I told you already. This is the collective causation structure. Let's gloss over that. I want to tell you, why does data protection not help you against this? And this is because when you look at it a little bit more closely, there are in fact two data processing steps involved in this predictive analytics data processing cycle. And the first is you collect data from training data. You collect training data from users, for instance, of your app or of your service, or from patients in a hospital, or people who voluntarily participate in a study, or what it is. You usually do that legally. Yeah, this is all legal. This whole predictive analytics thing is legal. Yeah, it's not. I'm not talking about something illegal. I'm talking about a gap in regulation. So you legally, for instance, with consent or with anonymization, you process the training data from the people who give it to you, and then you train a model. And if you do that well, and this is not automatic, but if you do it well, you do it in a way that is also an anonymization procedure. Yeah, you take care in training the predictive model, for instance, with supervised learning, or if it's a language model, that's much more hard. But let's go for a classical classifier or scoring algorithm. Then you use something like differential privacy in machine learning or other privacy implementations that make certain anonymity guarantees to the people in the training data, so that you can claim that the model data, so the parameters, the internal parameters of the trained model, that they are anonymous data, that you cannot reconstruct individual training data points from the model data. This is the idea. It's not always possible, but it's possible in many, many cases, especially for stupid classifiers of diseases or individual attributes. Yeah, it's harder in large language models. That's actually an open research problem, if that's even possible, but in classifiers it is. And so let's imagine you do it well, so that the training procedure is also an anonymization procedure. Then you end up with this trained model, which is anonymized and highly aggregate data or derived data. Yeah, it's not identical to these data points. And then you can discard of this data here. Let's get rid of this, yeah, because it's personal data. And we, according to the GDPR, we have this storage limitation. So once the purpose is fulfilled, we have to delete it anyway. So we delete it as quickly as possible. And then we have this trained model here. And this is anonymous data. You can do whatever you want with this data, especially, for instance, you can sell it or circulate it or publish it. Yeah, so you can circulate the predictive capacity that rests in the trained model. You can circulate it to many other application contexts where it can do a lot of harm if you use it in an abusive way. And then if you want to apply it to a single person again, for instance, to you, to predict from your behavioral data on a social media platform whether you suffer from depression, in this moment, if I know you, I'm producing personal data again, yeah? Because it is you and personal data about you. So in this case, in this second processing step here, I'm again in the realm of the GDPR. And I'm in the realm of the GDPR here, yeah? This is in the scope of the GDPR because it's personal data, yeah, the training phase. And the inference phase is also in the scope of the GDPR if it is about an identified person. But the thing in the middle, the circulation, copying, handling of the trained model is not necessarily in the scope of the GDPR if you do it well, in the sense that you anonymize the model. And also, and moreover, the data subjects here on the inference side might be completely different from the data subjects in the training stage. Yeah, you will train the model from the data of you, and then I can apply it to the people out there. And so the personal link, the link to the persons to which I apply the predictive model is different from the people from which I, for instance, collect the consent. Yeah, if these people gave some consent, for instance, by signing up to the platform or by signing up to a clinical trial or whatever it is, they were asked for consent. But then the model is applied to this person, and this person does not, in general, is not part of the training data set. Yeah, and this is something that is not in the logic of data protection, where the link, the personal link, der Personenbezug, is thought to be always with the same person, so that the person at the input stage will already object to some data processing that will be harmful in the output stage. But here, the harm is on different people, and not on the people who are here in the input stage. Yeah?
So if I throw away my training data, and I can't use my output data to train, because then I would be within the GDPR again. These models, we make this model, and then we don't, like the other models, have the ability to retrain. Or do they find other ways to consistently better
mean, there are so many techniques out there to implement that. For instance, you can even use federated machine learning, and which would mean that the model, a huge centralized model, gets incrementally trained on each single nodes, for instance, mobile phones of users, on personal data of these users, which will not leave the phones, but only a model delta will be pushed to the server and combined to the overarching model. Yeah, that is possible nowadays. They tout it as privacy-friendly machine learning because the personal data, the training data, never leaves the premises of the users, but you obtain predictive capacities as the operator of this whole system, which enable vast abuse if you use it on anybody else. Yeah?
How is predictive data not personal data, because they obviously make money on it?
As I said, this here is personal data, and they make money out of it. And this here is personal data, but not the thing here in between. Yeah, there is some phase in between the training of the model and the putting the model to use on some target individual, where you have like a moment, be it a second or be it 10 years, where you're not in the scope of the GDPR, because the trained model, the internal weights of the neural network or whatever it is not necessarily personal data.
But I thought, like, if this is just a probability and they assign this predictive value to you, that it's not labeled as personal data.
If the probability applies to you and one knows who you are, then this is personal data. If it's only a probability, like if I mean I now know you, and if I say that you are by 70% passing the exam, this is personal data for sure. Sorry.
Good. But they still can use that personal data from step 2.
Yeah, I mean, they would need to have a legal basis for this. I mean, for instance, yeah, they cannot automatically do this step here, because this would be processing of personal data, and according to the GDPR, that needs a legal basis. And that legal basis, for instance, could be your consent. For instance, a typical situation where it doesn't work is the app asks you whether they can predict your sexual identity, then you press no. But a typical situation where it always works is you apply for a job, and people say, yeah, if you want to be invited to the job interview, you agree or you consent to the use of risk scoring models on part of the HR department of the company. And if you say no, then you will not be invited. And then a power imbalance on this side here is being used to kind of force your consent, or that you will effectively give your consent. And this is how the GDPR is very weak governing this here, especially in contexts where many people want the job, and the 10% who will not agree, they just will not agree and will not get interviewed. Yeah?
We have a look at step 2. We're always speaking about big companies cannot do the GDPR. How likely is it that they will not use this step without your consent? Probably that's a back super, so we don't know exactly.
Yeah, I would say this is very true, but I mean, there is a huge enforcement deficit of the GDPR, which means that it could be well possible that many people do the second step here without asking or without having a legal basis according to the GDPR. I would say, and this is what I'm really carefully trying to point out to you here, is that especially large companies, they have the means in terms of the money, the legal task force to do this all legally. Yeah, they will figure out terms of service that you will click on I agree. Using some efforts to make you consent, because they can do this on legal basis. Yeah, because the legal regulation is so weak that it only takes some effort to navigate you in the loophole, and then you. And I think large companies do not need to break the law here to do what they want. It's more shady companies, data brokers, or like anonymous underground data processing things in the alt-right scene, or smaller companies who cannot afford the legal machinery to get this straight, who will more easily violate the law at this step 2, and not get discovered for that. Okay, so predictive privacy is not well protected by the GDPR. This is, you can read it in these papers here. I actually have been doing this work with my colleague from legal studies, Hanna Ruschemeyer, who will be a professor here at the University of Osnabrück starting at 1st of August. So far she has been professor at the Fernuni Hagen, so we will actually even intensify this research a lot here at the IKW. Yeah, this is not maintained by the GDPR. I will not go into the, I debated this a lot already, but let's better progress. The systemic infringement of privacy by means of predicting information about you is, I would say, one of the big structural risks of big data in combination with machine learning technology, and even pre-ChatGPT, pre-large language model, pre-transformer models, machine learning. Yeah, so this is not something new in the last 2 years, but more in the last 15 years. But there are more ethical issues to it. And I will also would like to point out this other risk here. Once again, I did it already in the lecture on AI and the state, but let's get back to it at least for a brief moment. The topic is the prediction gap in probabilistic decision making. We had this slide here. For instance, if you use such a predictive model, and let's now do it all for predicting. I mean, in probabilistic decision making, it's all about predicting. Let's say you predict whether a person frauded the social welfare system or not, or maybe there is some minor variation of fraud, which is this orange prediction here. Then we always, I mean, the output of such classifier is typically probability weights, as you already have been mentioning in your questions, and you will end up with a moment where you want to put that to action. And this moment where you convert a probability distribution over a range of options, yeah, the range of options here is yes, maybe, or no, or let's not call it maybe yes, yes with some variation, and no. This is the range of option, and this is a probability distribution on that range. And you want to convert it to something that you can act on. And how can you act on something that is like, it's a little bit like Schrödinger's cat. The moment you act on it, you will have to make it unique. And you cannot rest with this kind of versatility here. Yeah, you cannot treat the person as if they 60% frauded the system and 23% not frauded the system. Either you have to treat them as a fraudster, or how do you say that, fraudster, or not. And so you will end up with, in the moment where you have to take a decision, and maybe you just go by a maximum metric or something, yeah, that you find the element with the maximum probability weight. Hopefully it is far enough apart from the next second maximum, otherwise it will be shady, or, I mean, it is shady anyway. So you maybe would treat that people here as a fraudster because that is the maximum probability. And as I pointed out to you, this is, I would say, a very epistemically and ethically a delicate step to take, because a probability distribution here makes sense as long as you talk about large repetitions or large numbers of individuals. But in this moment, you want to treat a single individual, and this is then what I called crossing the prediction gap. Yeah, you convert a probability distribution into a point prediction about a single person. And that means that you treat the person on a certain bet. Yeah, you take the bet. You say it is most rational to bet that that person is a fraudster. and it is less rational to assume that they are not. And this, I would say, is something that where you ethically do a wrong to the person. You wrong the person on the, for instance, assumption of innocence, if you will. If it is about something where you can be innocent, if it is predicting the sexual identity of a person, there is no such a thing as innocence. It's then more that you that you wrong the person on the assumption of diversity. Yeah, maybe the person is even not something not on your list, or something that doesn't need to be decided or doesn't need to be fixed on your grid, but you do fix it on your grid, and you take a bet. And this is, I just want to repeat this here also in light of the exam, that this is this important moment of crossing the prediction gap. And this is also in this paper here, if you want to read a little bit more about it. So the definition is that applying predictive models to individual cases means converting population-based statistical inferences to point predictions about a single instance. What does that mean? Population-based statistical inferences. What is a statistical inference? I don't know if you... In classical statistics, you face the problem that you have some data about some people that you observed, and then you make a statistical inference, which is an information about the whole population. For instance, based on the sample here, I would say that 50% of the students at the University of Osnabrück are female presenting. And this is then an inference, yeah, an infer from a sample to a population, and this is called a statistical inference. While in predictive analytics, I'm not interested about the population at all. I'm interested how to treat you, and you individually. And the prediction gap crossing thing that happens is then that if I do not know what gender you are presenting, I take that inference that 50% of the people are female presenting, and then decide that I treat you, oh damn, now I picked 50%, which makes it hard for me to do a conclusive selection. But yeah, I apply it to you individually to say something about you, while actually a statistical inference only says something about the population, yeah, about how people are on average or at an aggregate scope. Yeah, because the aggregate scope would still allow for variation, diversity, deviation. Everything's possible in the aggregate scope. But once I apply this to you individually, I pin you down. And this is the prediction gap thing. And this actually reflects in what I would say in a fundamental paradigm shift in how knowledge production currently works in our society. Yeah, classical statistics is really a matter of the 20th century. For instance, sociology and other social and societal sciences have been hugely building on the abilities of classical frequentist statistics, which is something that was new in the 20th century, but now it starts to end, and a new era starts to shine, or to, I don't know, what is the opposite of shine, where the paradigm shifts. And this is why it is really of interest to compare these two statistical paradigms and be aware of how knowledge production transforms in our contemporary society. And as I said, the mathematical problem of classical statistics is this: how small can my sample be so that I can generalize to the total population? Yeah, I want to learn about something like, how do Germans vote next Sunday? And then the question is, how many Germans will I have to ask how they will vote next Sunday, so that I can generalize with a certain confidence to the whole population? And then the answer is, yeah, it must be at least 3,000 if you want to be 95% confident. And if you want to be 98% confident, it must be 10,000. Yeah, this is the problem of classical statistics. You are not able to ask everybody how they will vote, but you know that if I take the sample small but randomized and all of this, I can with a certain confidence statistically generalize. And this generalization is called an inference, and this is the problem of classical statistics. The problem of prediction is completely different because we are living in a completely different world in the 21st century. We usually have data about everybody. Or nearly everybody. Yeah, it's not a question anymore. Like, how small can the sample be? The thing is that more. I am the company, and I have data of 3 billion people on Earth, so I can say I roughly have data about everybody. But the problem is now the inverse problem. I want to apply it to you individually. So I want to say something about you as an individual based on the data I have of almost everybody in society. And then the problem is then given data about a large part of the population, how can we use that data to gain knowledge about specific individuals? Yeah, you see how the statistical problem is really the inverse, and that is the huge difference. Although many people in the industry would sell predictive analytics to you, it's only statistics. No, it's not statistics, it's actually statistics reversed or abused or in another paradigm or in a Bayesian paradigm and not the classical paradigm anymore, which is even of advantage somehow and sometimes, but it's just important that this is a new paradigm. And so this is why the old one is about totalizing knowledge, this is about individualizing knowledge. The old is about generalizing, and this here is about betting. You want to take a bet and not generalize anymore. Yes?
I know that this doesn't change the impact that predictive outcome has on the individual, but when we talk about predictive outcomes and we're deciding, okay, look, we have all this data and I want to predict and focus on a group and I want to predict a certain person, wherever I decide whatever the model decides to weigh as important in the prediction, doesn't that fall into the fallacy of correlation and causation?
Sure.
Yeah.
Totally sure, yes. Sorry, I didn't say that because I took that actually, this is 2 levels above or more general. Yes, we are always talking about correlation here, and in using predictive, in the way predictive models are being used and operationalized in our societies, they are actually being embedded in causal relations. Yeah, they claim a causation or they claim to detect causal relationships. And I already told you about the performative effects of predictions. Yeah, in the biases session, did I? Yeah, where predictive systems that claim to be only descriptive, and then you act on the prediction, and that actually creates people who are poorer or who are worse off. And so it really materializes and it turns correlation detection into causal agency in the world. Takeaway. Unlike statistics, predictive analytics is interested in the individual, but not in the sense of identifying you. Yeah, it's not that this whole technology is interested in your civic identity, in your name or whatever. No, but in the sense of relating every individual in terms of similarities and dissimilarities to all other individuals of a population in order to be able to treat them differently. Yeah? The new age of knowledge production is interested in the individual, but not as an identified individual, but as somebody who they want to tell apart from every other individual in the population. Yeah, it's more an immanent or internal difference system, where to put you in a system of difference relations, different and similarity relations. This is what this technology and the concurrent paradigm of knowledge production is about. And of course, this is powerful. And if you are a little bit of a Foucauldian, you know that knowledge is always connected to power, and new forms of knowledge are always connected to new forms of power. And this is why we need to turn to power again, also here in this very last lecture, in the last 17 minutes. What we see here is prediction power. It's very the definition of prediction power is actually very disappointing. It's just the power to predict information about anybody else. About anybody, yeah? So the emphasis is on anybody. It's not specific to I can predict something about you, but it's I have some technology that allows me to predict something with more or less high accuracy about nearly anybody. And this is, of course, a form of power. It emerges where data aggregates. Yeah, it's not a power that everybody has, but it's more a power that is the product of data aggregation. And it is maybe the most recent form of informational power asymmetry. Yeah, if data protection was built on the idea that we should balance out informational power imbalances, then I would say, yeah, this is what we need to tackle now. And of course, the prediction power is here. This is where prediction power emerges. If you have the trained model, you have the prediction power. I did not put the data donors here, the data subjects in the box, because sometimes you can also just buy the data, for instance, from a data broker or on marketplaces or whatever. So it is really, if you are able to use aggregate data from many individuals to train predictive models or language models and so on, then you have predictive power. And the power, you have it here already, and not only when you apply it to somebody. And this difference is crucial, but let's first get through the slides. Predictive privacy, come on, let's skip these slides. I need to speed up. I want to bring this example to you. It's one of my favorite examples because it's about personalized advertisement. Many people say this is harmless. And let's go through the life cycle of such an advertisement, and let's do it with this example here. It is a real example. It's a clinical trial for a new treatment of diabetes type 2. So the people were trying to recruit patients of diabetes type 2 for testing of a new treatment. And that was done on Facebook. And so the advertising customer, if you are running such an app, for instance, you are the university hospital who developed this new treatment, you will basically provide this advertisement and some criteria. Yeah, you remember the screenshots from the Facebook ad targeting criteria earlier? You can tick the boxes and that you provide to Facebook or Meta platforms, and what will then be done? Meta platforms feeds this into the targeting algorithm, and the targeting algorithm has the job to select the users to which the ad should be shown. And the targeting algorithm will try to select those users who most likely will engage with the app. Yeah, for instance, click on the app or sign up for the study through the app. Yeah, here you can use the sign up button so that you directly sign up for the study. This is the targeting algorithm's job. You might think, okay, so far so good, we are done. No, the thing is we're not done, because what also happens is, of course, in the online world, the engagement with the app is being tracked. Yeah, typically, social media platforms or online platforms, online advertising networks in general, would be able to measure, for instance, who of the user actually clicks on the ad or shares the app or presses the sign up button for the study on the ad, so that engagement gets tracked on a per user basis. And of course, what will you now do? You will not only use this for billing. Yeah, you do not only bill the advertisement customer because you get money for every click or every engagement. You not only use it for that, but you also use it for training data, because you now know, the targeting algorithm predicted which users are most likely to click on the ad, and then you get feedback data, and then you can verify these predictions in real time, so that you can measure, was the targeting algorithm actually right? And then you, in real time, retrain the targeting algorithm on this real-time feedback data so that it gets better. And you can even empirically observe that the accuracy of such an advertisement targeting algorithm increases steeply in the beginning of the first hours, and after 48 hours it reaches a point of saturation. People have been writing that on a study on marijuana consumption, so that the targeting algorithm would more and more accurately predict who is engaging with an app that is deliberately targeting people who consume marijuana. And here in this case, it is diabetes type 2. What do you obtain? What is the targeting algorithm after 2 days? It is an algorithm in this case rather accurately predicting about arbitrary platform users whether they have diabetes type 2, because the people engaging with the app, with the ad, are usually people signing up for the study or bookmarking the study or maybe sharing it to a friend, but you can even subtract that from the cohort upon retraining, so that you obtain a model that is not only a targeting algorithm, a fine-tuned targeting algorithm, but it is actually a model that can predict the prevalence of diabetes type 2 in any platform user. Not only in the users who saw the ad, not only in the users who are registered on the platform now, maybe also on users who register only tomorrow or next year or in 10 years, and maybe even on users who were registered in the past and who unregistered but you did not delete their data. So you see, and you do not even have to disclose that you are maybe using this targeting algorithm. Maybe you can even sell it as risk scoring product to the industry without people noticing, because you have this targeting algorithm. So with the help of the clinical research buddy who gave you this advertisement gig, you were able to train a predictive model for diabetes type 2 that you can then maybe even monetize outside this advertisement gig. This is what I call prediction power. Yeah, it brings you, the power accumulates here with the targeting algorithm. This targeting algorithm, the fine-tuned algorithm, typically never gets back to the advertisement customer. You do not have access to this, although this would be very useful if you are a clinical research buddy to predict a certain disease about people. But this is typically not what you get as the person funding this whole thing. So as the platform, you monetize this at least twice. Yeah, you charge for the advertisement gig, and you can reutilize the targeting algorithm potentially on other markets. And this is what brings me to one of my currently most active research topics, which I call the risk of secondary use of trained models. So let's imagine different example, but similar. But now you are a university hospital yourself. Imagine you are a psychiatric research unit at a university, and you have loads of depressive patients with depression, and you ask them to participate in a new study, and the idea of the study is to find out whether you can use the voice of people to predict depression. So you would collect audio data, audio recordings of the voice of your patients with their consent, and then you would train a machine learning model to predict, not from what people say, but rather from how they speak, whether they have depression. This is actually being done. I can show you examples. For instance, here, this is a paper, The Voice of Depression, Speech Features as Biomarkers for Major Depressive Disorder from Universität Aachen. This is another paper from a Chinese researchers published last year, Depression Recognition Using Voice-Based Pre-trained Models. They are not even a university hospital. They only took a foundational model from Meta platforms, fine-tuning it on a research data set of 189 recorded therapy sessions of depressive patients that was up for download at the University of South California. So they fine-tuned a foundational model for the extraction of speech features with 189 data sets that were open source data or open data in a research context with depressive patients to obtain a model that can predict with comparative accuracy to classic tests whether you are depressive from your voice. And this is not only research, this is only something that is being used in industry. This is a startup here, a Californian startup. It's called AI Berry. They sell their services to employers and for real-time mental health insights and monitoring of their employees. So employees are to install an app on their smartphones, and that app makes people to speak to the smartphone by asking it some questions, and then it records audio, and from that audio the system computes your mental health state using exactly those predictive models that I have been just showing you. And there is even an executive dashboard among the services of the company where the executives can see among their workforce how they are billing. Here is depression, anxiety, mood, stress, concentration, energy, and it's a screenshot. The list goes down here. And of course, I mean, they screenshot on their website only the aggregate executive dashboard, but why not output this at an individual level? For sure, you can do that. This here is another company, an Israeli company. It's been out there for 15 years. They do actually the same. They have also a model to predict from voice data psychiatric conditions, but also mood. And they sell it for use in human resource management, but also sales conversations. Yeah, for instance, on a phone hotline, they use the voice data of the customer to find out the personality type, but also potential like mood disorders of the customers to make sales conversations most effective. But they also use it in job interviews. And this, the model they have been using has actually been tested and developed in collaboration with the Neuropsychiatric Center Hamburg. Yeah, this is the founder and chief research officer of this Israeli company, VoiceSense, and this is the leader, the head of the Neuropsychiatric Center Hamburg. So they have been doing a clinical trial asking a couple of hundred volunteer depression patients to produce audio data. I obtained access to the patient agreement that they had to sign. They did not mention the company VoiceSense in that agreement. They just said they will test a tool to predict depression. And I was presenting that at the Chaos Computer Club Congress last December, so you can actually watch the video, which will be a little bit more detailed than I can do it now here. I also contacted this Peter Ton, this leader of the Neuropsychiatric Center, and he said back then in 2017 we did not have an idea that that company VoiceSense will use that in human resource management. When you go to the Wayback Machine and look at their website, you will find out that they did. So this is all a huge legal gap in my view, this risk of abuse of trained models. And this is the thing, this is not illegal. Yeah? They collect data legally, for instance, based on consent, and they train a predictive model. And this, when they do it well, this can be treated as anonymized data. And of course, in the application, in the human resource management context, you put that to application, and here you are in the realm of the GDPR again. But as I told you earlier, in the job interview context, you will definitely get the consent of the user. And here is where the misuse happens. This is the problem, that you can build such a system in a clinical context, telling people you will improve medicine, and then a copy of the model gets reused, for instance, by a company that does human resource management or hiring decisions, AI-driven hiring processes, and so on. And this is not legally prevented because the models are not in the scope of the GDPR, the trained models, and this is where power multiplies. Yeah, this is only where power gets actualized here, and here you are in the scope of the GDPR, but the multiplication of power is the multiplication of the potential application of the model. Yeah, when the model gets copied to other people or other entities, they all have the capacity, the potential in their hands to apply it to anybody, and this potentiality already needs to be regulated because that potentiality constitutes a powerful position, and not only the actual application of the models on which data subjects would have their defensive rights according to the GDPR. Yeah, this is a project. This is, as I promised, I will give you some outlook into the really ongoing research. This is what we are currently doing. We will start a very big project next year on this here, but there are already some publications out there that why is this not protected by the GDPR? You can read through it, but it's also by the AI Act. It does not regulate this risk either. I cannot go into the details here now, but you can look at the slides. And also we have this proposal, for instance, that we should update purpose limitation to AI models. Yeah, this is our solution, that we should actually implement legally a purpose limitation clause that applies to the AI model, to the trained model. Yeah, that you can only use an AI model for the purposes for which the training data was collected. So if, for instance, patients gave their consent to use their data to improve medicine, then you can only then you must restrict the purposes for which resulting models are being used to medicine and not bring them to other purposes. This is, in a nutshell, the proposition of a purpose limitation principle. You can look through the slides, and there are also many presentations as videos on my website if you are more interested in this. At this very point, I am finished. I thank you very much for attending this lecture through the last 13 sessions. It has been a big pleasure to me. It's always the pleasure point of the academic year for me to give this lecture. Yeah, I hope you have also a little bit of fun next week with the exam, although it will be very bureaucratic and multiple choice and all this. But yeah, I hope you took away something, and thanks to those who answered the official course evaluation. That was very, very nice of you, and I really, that was such a nice feedback you gave me, and I'm very grateful for that. See you.